At Christmas dinner, the crystal chandelier shimmered over a long mahogany table, silverware glinting laughter echoing as turkey and cranberry sauce passed from hand to hand. The tree glowed in the corner, ornaments sparkling against twinkling lights, and for one fleeting moment, I let myself believe maybe this year would be different. Maybe I could belong. Then my father's eyes found mine across the table, sharp and unyielding. My mother's pearls caught the light. As she leaned closer to him, her lips curving into a thin line. Together they looked at me with a kind of finality I had always dreaded, but never heard out loud. Their voices struck like a blade cutting through the music. "We wish you were never born." It was not whispered, it was not hidden. The words rang across the dining room, and the room itself seemed to recoil. A cousin dropped his fork with a metallic clatter. Someone's phone, already raised, tilted to capture the moment. And then came the laughter-mocking collective aimed entirely at me. The sound rolled around the table harsh and gleeful, as though erasing me was entertainment. My hands tightened around the cold glass of wine until my knuckles ached. My chair scraped back against the polished wood as I stood, breath sharp in my chest. Then erase me from everything I said, voice clear and unwavering. "From this family, from all your plans." The room froze. Not a breath stirred. For a moment all I heard was the crackle of the fire and the pounding of my own heart. My father, Gregory Hayes, looked like he had swallowed glass, his jaw tightening so hard I thought it might shatter. My mother, Margaret, adjusted the napkin in her lap with unnecessary precision, her emerald dress gleaming but her hands trembling. Across from them, my brother Daniel's eyes widened, then narrowed as he pressed a protective hand over his wife Samantha's arm, silently warning her not to interfere. Around the table, cousins stared as though I had just set fire to the Christmas tree. I didn't flinch. I let the silence hang. My voice echoed back at me, still alive in the heavy air. For years I had been treated like a guest in this house, not a daughter. Tonight they had said aloud what their eyes had always told me. The table had been set like a magazine cover, roasted turkey at the center, bowls of mashed potatoes, glistening with butter cranberry sauce, in crystal dishes pumpkin pie, waiting at the sideboard. Holiday music played softly from the speakers, and wreaths of pine scented the air. To anyone outside this house in Nashville, would have looked like the picture of family tradition. But under the glow of lights, venom had been waiting for its cue. Daniel's accomplishments had already been toasted earlier. My father raised his glass, boasting about his son's promotion to partner at a prestigious law firm downtown. Pride laced every syllable, the table buzzing with admiration. My mother clasped Daniel's hand, her pearls brushing his cuff eyes, gleaming with satisfaction. They all applauded, raising glasses, celebrating him as though he carried the entire Hayes name on his shoulders. And I, seated at the far end of the table with a polite smile, already knew no one would mention my name. I had sipped quietly from my wine, staring into the ruby liquid, willing myself invisible. I should have expected it. I should have been immune. But the words they hurled tonight weren't just absence or neglect. They were condemnation, final and merciless. I could see Aunt Linda's face, pale, her fork set down gently, her eyes darting between me and my parents, as if she wanted to speak but couldn't. A younger cousin whispered, "Did she really say that to his sister?" who elbowed him sharply to hush. Phones hovered discreetly above the table, the glow of screens betraying curiosity stronger than shame. Somewhere near the sideboard, Samantha's lips curved into a sympathetic but hesitant frown. The heat rose in my cheeks, but I didn't allow them to see me shrink. My chest burned, but my back stayed straight. All my life, I had endured their favoritism, their mockery hidden in polite tones, their pointed silence when it came to my work. Tonight, they decided to make the unspoken public. My father shifted in his seat, his hand gripping the armrest, voice rumbling low. "You always cause drama, Olivia. You always have." My mother's head inclined ever so slightly, like an executioner affirming the sentence. Daniel cleared his throat as if to speak, but Samantha's hand tightened over his arm and he stayed quiet. The mocking laughter faded into an uneasy hush, but its sting remained echoing off the walls. The Christmas lights blinked in rhythm, oblivious to the fracture ripping through the evening. I glanced at the tree gifts piled neatly underneath, and wondered how many bore Daniel's name, how many tokens of pride had been stacked in his honor, while mine were forgotten or brushed aside. I remembered every holiday past, when my drawings were dismissed as hobbies, when my voice was drowned out by his accolades. Tonight was not new, it was only louder, sharper, impossible to ignore. They wished me erased, and in front of everyone I had dared to agree. The hush grew unbearable. My glass remained on the table, a circle of condensation marking its place. The fire in the hearth popped loudly as if mocking the silence of the people around me. My breath came slow and steady, though inside I was trembling with fury. I turned toward the hallway, each step deliberate heels clicking against hardwood. Behind me whispers rose like a tide, sharp, pitying, speculative. The family dinner had shifted from tradition to spectacle in an instant. I felt the weight of eyes pressing against my back, the kind that wanted to consume the drama but never intervene. The foyer smelled of pine, the wreath on the door brushing my shoulder as I reached for my coat. My fingers fumbled for a moment, not from weakness, but from the electricity of rage rushing through me. I could still hear their voices in my head, my father's cold pronouncement, my mother's complicit silence. I pulled my coat tight, opened the door, and stepped into the night. The Tennessee air cut through me, sharp and bracing snowflakes settling into my hair. For the first time in years, the cold felt cleaner than the warmth I had left behind. The house glowed behind me, windows spilling light into the dark, but inside was no longer my place. I paused at the end of the driveway, boots crunching on the snow. A chorus of muffled voices rose inside, the buzz of phones, recording the click of glasses refilling as if nothing had happened. To them, maybe it was just another scandal, another story to whisper about tomorrow. To me, it was the end of the last illusion. I looked back one final time. Their laughter had been the final cut, and my words had been my only defense. I no longer belonged at their table. I no longer needed to. The night stretched out before me, silent except for my footsteps, and with each one I felt less erased and more alive, as though the real story of who I was had only just begun. The room stayed frozen long after my words had cut through the air. The fire crackled in the hearth, and the only movement was the faint clink of a spoon sliding from someone's trembling hand onto a china plate. My father's jaw twitched, his eyes locked on me with a fury that seemed ready to ignite, but his tongue faltered. For once, Gregory Hayes had no command to give. My mother shifted in her chair, adjusting her pearls with a tight smile that fooled no one. "Don't make this worse, Olivia," she hissed, but her voice was thin, fragile, against the silence that pressed in around us. I could feel every stare. A cousin to my right pressed his phone closer to his chest, the faint glow of a recording app shining against his shirt. Samantha lowered her eyes, pretending to rearrange her napkin. Daniel sat rigid, his hand clenched on the table as though, if he moved, the entire facade of control would collapse. The smell of roasted turkey and cloves, once warm and inviting, now clung like smoke in my throat. I turned away from them, the stem of my glass leaving a wet ring on the linen as I set it down. My chair scraped back again as I stepped toward the hallway. The sound echoed, final and sharp, cutting through the strained quiet. No one moved to stop me. The air in the hall was colder, though the heat from the dining room spilled in weakly behind me. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out the Christmas music still playing faintly on the speakers. I reached for my coat at the rack, my hands shaking. But before I could pull it free, a familiar voice whispered from behind me. "Olivia, wait." I turned and there was Aunt Linda, her silver hair pulled back neatly, her hands trembling as she clutched her shawl tighter. She stepped toward me, her eyes soft and wet, with something I had not seen all night: compassion. She wrapped her arms around me, suddenly pulling me into her chest the way she had when I was a child frightened of thunderstorms. "You are not a disgrace," she whispered firmly into my ear. "You are simply different from them. And that is not shameful." The lump in my throat swelled. I let out a shaky laugh, my breath catching. Different has always meant failure in this family. Linda pulled back, her face tightening with defiance. Then let it mean strength. Her words were quiet but resolute. Behind her, shadows moved at the edge of the hallway, other relatives peeking through the dining room doorway, eyes wide, their phones lifted like they were watching a scene from a play instead of a family falling apart. The memory hit me like a wave. I was 15 again, sitting at this same table. Daniel had unwrapped a sleek leather briefcase that Christmas, a symbol of the lawyer he was destined to become. Applause filled the room, glasses raised in his honor. My gift, handed to me almost as an afterthought, was an art set. My father laughed as I held it up. "Maybe someday you can design ads for your brother's law firm," he'd said, his voice cutting through me as easily as the carving knife through ham. Everyone chuckled politely. I had forced a smile, pretending it didn't sting. But that night alone in my room, I had painted until the brushes frayed, trying to prove even to myself that it wasn't worthless. It was never enough. I blinked the memory away as Linda squeezed my hand and stepped back, her expression heavy with things she could not say aloud. "Don't give them the satisfaction of breaking you." She pressed my coat into my arms before retreating toward the dining room. I pulled it on slowly, the wool scratching against my skin, each button a small act of defiance. The whispers from the dining room rose behind me, some sharp with disapproval, others hushed and pitying. And then piercing through them came laughter. My father's voice joined by another cousin's, ringing out again as though mocking my very exit. I stepped outside into the night, the door shutting with a firm thud behind me. The December air sliced into my cheeks, snowflakes drifting like pale ash against the dark sky. My boots crunched into the thin crust of ice along the walkway. From inside, muffled voices spilled, faintly mingling with the music still playing. But the world beyond the door was blessedly silent. At the end of the driveway, I pulled my phone from my clutch. The screen lit up instantly, a flood of notifications flashing in quick succession. The family group chat, Hayes Christmas 2024, was exploding with messages. My stomach dropped as I saw the thumbnail at the top, me standing from my chair, glass in hand, firelight flickering against my face. Above it, the caption from one of my younger cousins, "Christmas dinner turned into a movie." I tapped it before I could stop myself. My father's voice filled the quiet street. "We wish you were never born." Then me standing tall, declaring, "Then erase me from everything." Gasps audible, forks clinking, and then silence. The video ended, already racking up reactions and laughing emojis. I shut the screen quickly, but it was too late. My humiliation had escaped the confines of the dining room. It was entertainment now, fodder for family gossip, destined to slip into the wider world by morning. My throat tightened, nausea rising as I imagined it, spreading to Facebook, to Instagram, to colleagues who would stumble across it and whisper behind my back. Snowflakes clung to my lashes as I stared at the glow of my parents' house, still pulsing with warmth that felt poison to me now. I thought of every holiday where my place had been an afterthought, every year where my accomplishments were brushed aside, while Daniel was crowned the golden child. The words, "We wish you were never born," were not a surprise. They were just the first time the mask had been dropped in public. I pulled my coat tighter, forcing my breath to steady as clouds puffed into the frozen night. Behind me, the house hummed with mocking laughter and whispered speculation. Ahead of me, the street stretched, quiet and empty, Christmas lights glowing faintly in neighbors' yards, innocent of the cruelty I carried. The phone buzzed again in my hand. I glanced down. A new message in the group chat. My cousin had already clipped the video and written, "This will be talked about for years." Another message followed. Guess Olivia finally snapped. I stared at the screen until the cold bit through my gloves. My humiliation was sealed. Yet somewhere beneath the sting, another feeling stirred, anger, sharp and insistent, refusing to be buried. If they wanted me erased, then I would carve my name deeper than they could ever scrub away. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and lifted my head. Snow drifted steadily through the lamplight as I stepped forward, leaving the house behind me. Each crunch of my boots on the icy sidewalk was a reminder they had banished me, but the night was mine now. The snow thickened as I walked, a white curtain falling over the quiet Nashville street. Christmas lights blinked across porches inflatable, Santas swayed in the cold wind, yet I felt as though I was moving through a stage after the curtain had already dropped. My phone buzzed again and again in my pocket, but I ignored it until the vibration became unbearable. When I pulled it out, the glow nearly blinded me. The family group chat was on fire. At the top, the video had already been clipped shorter. Just a few seconds, my father's voice sharp as a blade. "We wish you were never born." Then my reply, steady and furious, then erase me from everything. That was it. The clip looped endlessly, stripped of context, a spectacle ready for mockery. Dozens of laughing emojis dotted the thread. A cousin wrote, "Meme of the year, guys." Another typed, "Olivia finally lost it." My stomach lurched. My humiliation had officially left the confines of that dining room. It wasn't just whispered anymore, it was broadcast. I could already imagine tomorrow the neighbors murmuring at church, Daniel's colleagues, smirking in their offices, acquaintances, scrolling by the clip on Facebook, their fingers pausing just long enough to share. I tucked the phone back into my coat, but it buzzed again, insistent. This time, it wasn't the group chat. A private message from Aunt Linda appeared on the screen. "Don't let them break you. You are stronger than they know. Call me if you need to." I stared at her words, my throat tightening. One voice of kindness among the chorus of mockery. The cold bit into my cheeks as I kept walking, boots grinding against the icy pavement. Memories flooded me, uninvited and sharp. Thanksgiving 2 years ago, my parents hosting a grand dinner for business partners. I had shown up hopeful, carrying a pecan pie I'd baked myself. My mother took it from me at the door, whispered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "We don't need this tonight. Please don't embarrass us." I spent the evening at the kids' table while Daniel's successes were toasted in front of city officials. I remembered my birthday the following year. No call, no card. A week later, my mother explained they'd been busy with Daniel's case. Meanwhile, his 35th had been celebrated with a catered party at the country club. Excluded wasn't even the right word. It was erasure year after year until tonight, when they finally said it aloud. The word inheritance slid into my thoughts, sour and heavy. Last autumn, there had been a family meeting in my father's study. Daniel leaned casually against the armchair, already looking like the crown prince, while my mother hovered near the window. My father spoke with pride, announcing Daniel as the heir to Hayes Realty, the family business. The company, the properties, the trust, all his. My name wasn't even mentioned. When I asked what role I had, my father shoved a folder toward me, some mockery of a PR position, nothing more than a leash. I had declined. His eyes turned to steel as he told me I'd regret it. Tonight, I finally understood that regret was theirs, not mine. Another buzz. Against my better judgment, I opened it. A notification from Facebook. My younger cousin had posted the clip, publicly captioned, "Things got wild at Hayes' Christmas dinner." Already dozens of comments stacked beneath, some amused, some pitying, most simply gawking. I wanted to drop the phone into the snow, to bury it under ice and forget it existed, but I couldn't stop watching the views climb. My disgrace was becoming entertainment. I stumbled onto a quieter street lined with bare trees, their branches laced with snow. I leaned against a lamppost, my breath fogging in the light. The betrayal wasn't just from my parents anymore. It was from every relative who had sat silent, every cousin who now treated my pain like a viral joke. My chest ached with the weight of it, but beneath that ache, something else began to stir, anger sharp and clear. I thought of Daniel, of the smug look on his face as the boardroom was promised to him, of my father's pride radiating like a crown passed down from one man to the next. I thought of the countless nights I stayed up working on designs for clients, pouring myself into interiors that made small cafes shine, that gave boutique stores new life. Those clients had thanked me, written me notes, even cried when they saw the finished spaces. Yet in this family, I was nothing more than a shadow, a failure defined by not being him. My phone buzzed again. Another message. This one not from family, but from an old client, a restaurant owner I had helped the year before. Saw the video. Don't listen to them. Your work kept us alive during a brutal season. We're still proud to have your designs in our windows. My eyes blurred, not from humiliation this time, but from something close to relief. There were people who saw me, who valued what I created, even if my own blood did not. I slid the phone back into my pocket, pressing it against my leg as though to anchor myself. Snowflakes drifted down into my hair, melting against my skin. Around me, the city was silent. The Hayes family had tried to erase me. But as I walked, each step echoing against the icy pavement, I began to realize they hadn't erased me. They had freed me. At the corner, I stopped and looked back once more toward the glow of the house I had left behind. Inside, the tree lights blinked steadily, the laughter no doubt carrying on as though nothing had fractured. But I knew better. Tonight, something had cracked open. And though they thought it was my ruin, I felt the spark of something else, a resolve taking root deep inside. I pulled my coat tighter and turned down the street, heading toward the faint glow of downtown. My humiliation was now public, yes. But so was the truth of who they were. And maybe, just maybe, this disgrace could become the beginning of my revenge. The morning after Christmas, I sat by the single frosted window of my apartment in Chicago, coffee cooling, untouched on the table beside me. The city outside was hushed under a heavy blanket of snow cars, buried sidewalks untouched. My phone buzzed relentlessly with notifications, shares of the video comments, tags from people I hadn't spoken to in years. I should have turned it off. I should have spared myself. But when the screen lit up with a subject line that didn't reek of mockery, I paused. Inquiry, interior design consultation. I blinked, almost laughing at the absurdity. My name was a trending topic in our family's toxic little orbit, a public disgrace for all of Nashville to gossip about, and yet here was someone asking about my work. Against reason, I opened it. The email was direct, almost startling in its clarity. My name is Ethan Caldwell, CEO of NextGen Technologies. I saw the video circulating last night. While your family might have seen disgrace, I saw conviction. I looked at your portfolio afterward. Your restaurant projects the boutique interiors. They stood out because they felt alive, not corporate. We're planning a major expansion and need a complete redesign for our headquarters in New York. Logo, interiors, the whole vision. Let's talk. I read it 3 times, my pulse quickening each time. A CEO. A project in New York. Words like complete redesign and the whole vision. It felt surreal. I glanced at the corner of my apartment, where sketches were pinned to the wall with push pins overlapping like desperate proof that I existed. My father's voice echoed from memory. Art won't pay the bills. Yet here it was, a chance to prove him wrong. My hands trembled as I typed a cautious reply, agreeing to a call later that afternoon. When Ethan's voice came through the line, it carried confidence, but also warmth. He didn't waste time. He listed details from my work that only someone who had studied carefully would know: the cafe in Lincoln Park, with reclaimed wood walls, the Cambridge bookstore I'd rebranded, that was now thriving. He said, I don't want noise. I want vision. I want someone who isn't afraid to be seen. Something inside me stirred at those words. He had watched that viral clip, watched me stand up to my family in front of everyone, and while the world mocked, he saw courage. When he named the figure, I nearly dropped the phone. $250,000 for a 6-month contract, more than I had ever earned in a single year. I repeated the number back to him, afraid I had misheard. His laugh was low and certain. That's correct. We're investing in more than furniture and paint. We're investing in identity. And I think you understand identity better than most. After the call ended, I sat in stunned silence. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room, and even that seemed too loud. My disgrace had gone viral, but instead of closing doors, one had opened wider than any I had ever dared imagine. Still doubt gnawed at me. I thought of every time I had been told to be practical to accept my place. My father's face when I rejected the PR role at Hayes Realty. My mother's cold silence whenever I mentioned my studio. What if I failed? What if I proved them? Right after all, I called Maya Torres, my closest friend from college, now an architect, with a small firm. She listened patiently as I spilled everything: the video, the humiliation, Ethan's email, the staggering offer. When I finished, there was a pause and then her voice steady as stone. Take it. You've been waiting your whole life for this moment. Prove them wrong. Prove yourself right. Her certainty was the lifeline I didn't know I needed. That night I cleared the clutter from my desk, spreading out my sketchpads, markers, and laptop. I scribbled furiously, filling pages with concepts that merged warmth and innovation, technology and humanity. I imagined a headquarters where creativity wasn't stifled by gray walls, where employees felt seen instead of swallowed. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was sketching for scraps of validation. I felt like I was sketching for a future. Sleep barely touched me before the next day arrived, heavy with snow but bright with purpose. I signed the contract digitally, my name glowing on the screen. The figure at the bottom nearly made me cry again, but I steadied myself. This wasn't luck. This wasn't charity. This was recognition earned. The moment the confirmation email came through, I knew I couldn't work from my small apartment anymore. If I was going to take this seriously, I needed a real space. I found a loft for rent in River North, a converted warehouse with exposed brick and high ceilings. It was drafty, the radiator groaned like an old man, but the light from the wide windows made the dust shimmer like possibility. I brought in secondhand furniture one piece at a time, carrying a desk up the stairs myself, breathless and sweating. I bought paint with the little money I had left and rolled it onto the walls until my arms ached. At night, I slept on the couch, surrounded by cardboard boxes and hope. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I named it Horizon Studio, a bright line between the past and the future, between the family that had tried to erase me and the woman who refused to vanish. While I poured myself into Ethan's project, my phone continued to buzz with the noise of my family. A cousin posted a photo of my loft with the caption, "Olivia's little hobby shop." My mother called once, her voice sharp with disapproval. "Stop embarrassing us. You'll regret chasing this nonsense." I held the phone steady, my voice calm as I answered, "I've regretted listening to you more than anything else." Then I hung up. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was liberating. Nights blurred into mornings. Maya joined me after work, sprawled across the floor with her laptop while we brainstormed layouts. Pizza boxes stacked high, sketches covered the walls. Slowly, Horizon Studio began to feel alive. Ethan called regularly, his faith in me fueling my own. He told me the board in New York was impressed, already eager for the presentation in January. Sometimes exhaustion pulled me back into doubt. Bills piled on the corner of my desk unopened. My savings dwindled to almost nothing. But then I'd remember my father's voice at that table, the words meant to bury me. "We wish you were never born." I clung to the fire those words had ignited. On New Year's Eve, I sat alone in the loft, sketches scattered around me, a single string of fairy lights glowing against the brick wall. Outside, fireworks erupted over the skyline, bursts of color splitting the night. I raised a glass of cheap champagne to myself. If they erased me, I whispered, I'll draw myself back bigger than they ever imagined. And as the midnight bells tolled, I felt for the first time in my life that the new year was mine. The loft smelled of fresh paint and takeout boxes, a strange mix of exhaustion and possibility. I stood in the middle of the empty space, light pouring in through tall windows, my breath visible in the cold. This was it. Horizon Studio wasn't just an idea anymore. It had walls, a floor that creaked a ceiling high enough to make me feel small and limitless at once. I pressed my hand to the exposed brick, feeling the grit beneath my palm. "We start here," I whispered, though there was no one else in the room. The rent alone devoured what little I had saved. The moving truck had cost more than I planned, and the used desks I bought from a clearance warehouse weren't much better than cardboard. But they were mine. I hauled them up the stairs one at a time, my muscles screaming, sweat freezing against my skin as the Chicago winter pressed through the broken window seals. Nights were spent curled on a couch I'd found on Craigslist, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the radiator hiss like an old man clearing his throat. Still, every creak, every draft felt like proof that I was free. By day, I worked on Ethan Caldwell's project. His calls came often, his voice steady and encouraging. "Push the boundaries," he said once. "Don't be afraid to take risks." I filled the walls with sketches, mood boards, blending warm wood with sleek glass offices that felt like homes instead of cages, collaborative spaces with sunlight and color instead of gray cubicles. Maya came after work most evenings, her laptop balanced on her knees as she sprawled on the floor. Together we brainstormed, tearing down old sketches, replacing them with bolder ones. We argued about light fixtures and laughed about our exhaustion until dawn crept through the windows. Still, the pressure was crushing. Bills stacked on the corner of my desk, electricity, water, internet, rent. My bank account shrank each week, numbers dwindling faster than the temperature outside. More than once I stared at the red totals, panic pressing against my ribs. What if this collapsed before it even began? What if I proved my father right, that this was nothing more than a hobby masquerading as a dream? My phone vibrated, constantly dragging me back into the orbit of the family I had tried to leave behind. A photo appeared in the group chat, my loft, snapped by a cousin who had driven by out of curiosity. The caption read, "Olivia's little hobby shop." Laughing emojis followed, piling on like stones. I felt the sting but refused to respond. Later that week, my mother called. Her voice was sharp-clipped. "Stop embarrassing us, Olivia. You think people aren't talking. You'll regret this nonsense when it all falls apart." I held the phone tight, my voice calm, almost cold. "I regretted listening to you more than anything else." And I hung up. The silence that followed was louder than any insult. It was mine. Every day I returned to the loft with new determination. Ethan sent over plans for NextGen's headquarters in New York, a sprawling space in the heart of Manhattan. "Think bold," his email read. So I did. I imagined an office that wasn't just walls and desks, but a place that inspired, where people walked in and felt alive. I poured myself into every line, every texture. My fingers cramped from sketching, my laptop overheated from rendering, but I refused to stop. Maya reminded me to eat. She brought soup in paper containers, her eyes bright despite the exhaustion that matched my own. "This is going to change everything," she told me, and I wanted to believe her. But the weight of my family's shadow loomed. My father's words echoed in my mind, "Daniel will carry the Hayes name. You'll fade." I saw them gathered in Nashville, raising glasses to Daniel, toasting his partnership at the law firm while I was dismissed with a sneer. My humiliation at Christmas was still fresh, still raw, but it was fuel now. Every late night, every design pinned to the wall was a strike back at them. One night, as I dragged my brush across a giant canvas mock-up, my phone rang again. This time it wasn't family. It was Ethan. His tone was lighter than usual. "Olivia, the board wants to see your concept in person. I want you in New York next month to present." My heart hammered against my ribs. New York. In front of executives who would decide if this project, the biggest chance of my career, would live or die. "I'll be there," I said, though. My voice shook. After I hung up, I stood in the middle of the loft, staring at the sketches covering the walls. I saw not just drawings, but a map out of everything I had been told I couldn't be. My hands trembled as I touched one of the renderings, tracing the clean lines of a glass atrium that seemed to glow even on paper. For a moment, I thought of my father again, his voice that night. "We wish you were never born." And I realized something. I didn't need his inheritance. I didn't need Hayes Realty or his approval or even his recognition. All I needed was the work, the vision, the proof that I wasn't erased. The loft was quiet except for the hum of the city outside, the faint rattle of the heater, and my own breath. I raised my glass of cheap wine, toasting the sketches, the exhaustion, the endless nights. "This is bigger than me," I whispered. "It's the beginning of payback." And in that moment, the cold loft didn't feel empty. It felt alive. It felt like the start of something they would never be able to take away from me again. The train rattled beneath me as it sped east, snow smearing across the windows like blurred brushstrokes. I had barely slept, my laptop glowing through the night as I adjusted slide after slide, fine-tuning the presentation for NextGen's board. My hands ached from sketching, my eyes burned, but adrenaline kept me upright. The hum of the train, the chatter of strangers around me, all faded into the background. This trip to New York was more than a pitch. It was a trial. I stared at my reflection in the glass as the dark morning shifted into pale daylight. My hair was tied back, my blazer pressed as best as I could manage with my limited resources. Still, I could hear my father's voice slithering in my head, "Art won't pay the bills." That sentence had haunted me for years, but this time it fueled me. I whispered into the hum of the train, "Watch me." When the skyline of Manhattan appeared in the distance, my chest tightened. The city gleamed like a promise I wasn't sure I deserved. The cab ride from Penn Station carried me past towering billboards and glass buildings that seemed to pierce the clouds. My nerves twisted, but beneath them was something steadier, resolve. The NextGen offices were temporary, tucked in a modern space downtown, while the new headquarters awaited its rebirth. I was ushered into a sleek conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows. The board members were already seated, men and women in tailored suits, their expressions neutral but expectant. At the head of the table, Ethan gave me the faintest nod, his quiet reassurance more grounding than I could have imagined. When I rose to speak, my palms damp against the remote, my voice wavered for just a moment before finding its rhythm. I spoke of design not as luxury, but as necessity. Of workplaces that inspired rather than suffocated. I showed them how warm wood tones could balance cold steel, how open spaces could encourage connection, how light itself could become part of the architecture. Slide after slide revealed sketches, renderings, concepts that lived somewhere between art and utility. At first the room was silent. Eyes flicked across my work without expression. My heart hammered. But then one of the younger directors leaned forward, her pen tapping against her notebook. "This feels like the future," she said. "It's not just design, it's identity." The words spread like a spark. Heads began to nod, questions rolled forward, serious, curious, not dismissive. By the time I finished, a ripple of applause rose, genuine and sustained. I blinked, my breath catching. For the first time, applause was for me, not for Daniel, not for the Hayes name, but for me. Afterward, Ethan approached, his hand steady on my shoulder. "You did more than pitch a design," he said. "You gave them a vision. That's what I wanted." He slid a folder toward me across the conference table. Inside, the contract was no longer 6 months, it was 12. The figure at the bottom made my chest seize. $500,000. My hand shook as I traced the number. I looked up, my voice breaking into a whisper. "Are you sure?" He smiled. "I'm sure. You're not just designing offices, Olivia. You're building a company." That night, back in my hotel room, I stared at the contract spread across the bed, the city lights flickering through the curtains. I thought of my father's face at Christmas, his mouth curling around the words, "never born." I thought of my mother's silence, Daniel's pity. And now here I was, holding proof that I was not erased, I was expanding. But while I was standing in New York, my family in Nashville was watching too. At the Hayes home, another dinner was underway, their voices filling the dining room where I had been cast out weeks earlier. Daniel presented a watch to my father, an expensive piece engraved with initials. My mother beamed, pouring wine as though nothing had fractured. But then a cousin pulled out her phone, showing a live stream of the conference. My face filled the tiny screen as I presented, confident, alive. The table fell silent for a moment. Then the scoffs began. "It's just a phase," my mother muttered, her tone brittle. "She'll crash soon." My father's laugh was sharp, cruel. "Designing offices doesn't make you family." They drank, they dismissed. Yet Daniel's eyes lingered on the screen longer than the others, his jaw tight, his hand tapping against his glass. He saw what they didn't, what they refused to. The next morning, the news spread further. A business magazine ran the headline, "From Family Disgrace to Rising Designer, Olivia Hayes Redefines Workspaces." My photo, captured mid-speech, stared back at me from the page. I traced the letters of my name in print, disbelief mingling with pride. The phone in my pocket buzzed. I expected Maya, maybe Ethan, but the name on the screen made my stomach knot. "Daniel." I answered. My voice clipped. "What do you want?" There was a pause, his breath heavy through the line. "We need to talk," he said finally. "Dad is furious. And this is bigger than you think." I let the silence stretch, staring out at the city pulsing beneath me, horns and sirens echoing like a heartbeat. My brother's voice was steady, but beneath it, I heard something new. Fear. "I'll listen," I said, my voice calm but cold. But only on my terms. When the line went dead, I stood alone at the window, New York, stretching infinite before me. The girl who had once been told she should never have been born was about to become the one name her family could no longer ignore. Daniel chose an upscale cafe on Michigan Avenue, the kind of place where businessmen in suits held hushed conversations over espresso. I spotted him by the window, his tie loosened, his expression tight. When I walked in, heads turned toward me, not because anyone recognized me, but because I carried myself differently now. The humiliation of Christmas had burned into something sharper. I slid into the seat across from him, the steam of his untouched coffee rising between us. "You look tired," he said, his voice calm but cautious. "I've been working," I replied, unlike some people who were handed everything. His jaw tensed. "I didn't ask for a fight, Olivia. I asked for a conversation." The waitress set a mug in front of me. I wrapped my hands around it, letting the heat seep into my cold fingers. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, snow fell thick against the city streets, cars creeping along as if weighed down by the silence between us. Finally, Daniel leaned forward. "Dad is furious. He says you're humiliating the family with these articles, the interviews, the way the press spins this." I cut him off. "I didn't spin anything. They did when they told me I should never have been born. That's on them." He flinched just slightly, but recovered quickly. "Maybe, but you're stoking it now. The headlines aren't about your designs, Olivia. They're about the family feud. That clip at Christmas, the way you walked out, it's everywhere. And it's hurting us." I let out a bitter laugh. "Hurting you, Hayes Realty is crumbling because it's old Daniel, stuck in the past. Clients want vision. They don't care about marble floors and your father's handshake deals anymore. Don't you dare put that on me." He exhaled sharply, rubbing his forehead. "You don't understand. You've been excluded from the inheritance, the trust, the company. That's not going to change, so why keep provoking them?" The word inheritance landed like a stone in my gut. I thought of the meeting in my father's study, the polished mahogany desk, the way my name hadn't even been read aloud when the assets were divided. Daniel crowned the air while I was erased, as though my blood didn't run the same. My fists tightened around the mug. "I'm not provoking them," I said, my voice low. "I'm finally living without their permission." His eyes flickered, uncertain. For the first time, I saw cracks in his armor. He leaned back in his chair, silent for a moment, then admitted, "Hayes Realty is struggling. We've lost contracts. Clients say the company looks outdated. Investors are nervous." I watched him carefully, and his gaze met mine, steady but troubled. "And some of the board thinks, maybe you're the answer." The words hit me like a shock. For years I had been the disgrace, the afterthought. Now in the shadow of collapse my name had been spoken in that boardroom, my father's worst nightmare. I leaned forward. "Do you believe that Daniel hesitated? I believe you're talented. I've always believed that. But I also believe you're tearing this family apart." Anger rose like fire in my chest. I set the mug down hard enough for it to rattle. "No, Daniel. They tore it apart when they told me I shouldn't exist. Don't twist this on me." He slammed his palm on the table, startling the couple behind us. "You don't get it. You're winning the press war, but you're killing Dad. He built Hayes Realty with his bare hands, and now people think his daughter is the visionary while he's the relic. Do you have any idea what that's doing to him?" I stared at him, my heartbeat thundering. "Do you know what it did to me, Daniel? Every Christmas, every birthday, every moment I was erased so you could shine. They made sure the world knew you were the pride and I was the shame. You want me to feel sorry now that the tables have turned?" His face drained of color. The fight left his eyes replaced with something heavier, guilt maybe, or recognition. He leaned back, voice softer. "I never wanted this. I wanted us both to matter." A silence fell, fragile and dangerous. My phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting up with a headline notification: "The Hayes Family Feud daughter cast aside, now a rising star." A photo of me at the Miami conference stared back at both of us. I watched Daniel's expression harden as he read the words. "Do you see?" he muttered. "They're making us a spectacle." I picked up the phone and tucked it into my coat pocket. "No, Daniel. They're finally telling the truth." For a long moment he said nothing. His hand hovered near his coffee cup, fingers trembling just slightly. I realized then that Daniel wasn't as untouchable as he wanted me to believe. He saw the storm coming. He knew Hayes Realty was slipping, and the Golden Child title was no longer enough to keep him safe. He looked up at me, his eyes tired. "Please, Olivia, don't let this destroy us completely." I rose from the table, pulling my coat tighter. "It's not me who's destroying anything. It's the legacy they built on favoritism and lies. I won't carry it anymore." I walked out into the falling snow, the cold air slapping my cheeks, my breath rising in clouds. Behind me, the cafe door swung shut, muting the clatter of cups and Daniel's silence. On the sidewalk, my phone buzzed again. An email notification flashed across the screen. "Invitation International Design Conference, Miami keynote speaker." My breath caught. The world was opening wider, far beyond Nashville, beyond Hayes Realty, beyond the smallness they had tried to cage me in. I tilted my head back, snowflakes landing on my lashes. They had wished I was never born. And now the same name they tried to erase was about to stand on a global stage. The plane descended over Miami, the coastline glittering under a sun so bright it felt almost unreal after months of Chicago snow. From the window I watched palm trees lining the highways, the ocean stretching into endless blue. I pressed my hand against the glass, my pulse racing. This wasn't just another job. This was the stage where I would step out of the shadow my family had trapped me in and claim a place they could never deny. The hotel lobby buzzed with voices when I arrived. Attendees of the International Design Conference clustered in groups, badges swinging from lanyards, their conversations layered with accents from around the world. I checked in, clutching the folder of notes I had rewritten a dozen times, and rode the elevator up to my room. From the balcony, I could see the Atlantic waves cresting like liquid glass. The horizon seemed infinite, and for once I let myself imagine my own life stretching out the same way. The next morning, the conference hall gleamed under chandeliers. Hundreds of chairs lined the floor, everyone filled with designers, executives, journalists. Banners read "New Voices in Design Innovation Meets Humanity." My name appeared on the screen with 4 others listed as keynote speakers. Seeing it there, Olivia Hayes sent a jolt through me. For so long, my name had been spoken like a curse. Now it was displayed for an audience waiting to listen. When they called me to the stage, my hands trembled around the remote. I took a breath, scanning the sea of faces. For a heartbeat, I thought of Christmas night, the sneers, the laughter. My father's voice echoing, "We wish you were never born." That memory pressed into me like a knife, but instead of cutting it, steadied me. I began. I spoke not just of design, but of identity. I told them about Horizon Studio, about refusing to let creativity be dismissed as a hobby. I admitted that I had been excluded from my family's inheritance, cast aside from the family business, told I was a disgrace. The room was silent, the weight of my words pulling them in closer. Then I shifted to the work, the interiors that had transformed small cafes, the bookstore that had come alive with my designs, and now the concept for NextGen's New York headquarters. Images filled the screen behind me, warm wood alongside steel lights spilling across open spaces, offices designed not to cage but to inspire. This, I said, my voice firm, is not about walls and furniture. It's about creating spaces where people feel they belong. Because no one deserves to be told they don't. When I clicked to the final slide, the room rose. Applause thundered. People stood clapping until my chest ached from the sound. A woman in the front row wiped her eyes. A man shouted yes. My throat tightened and I bowed my head, overwhelmed. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the background, the mistake, the forgotten one. I was the center. Back in Nashville, my family was watching. The conference had been live-streamed, the video already spreading. My father sat at the head of the dining table, the same seat where he had once condemned me. His fists clenched on the armrests as my face appeared on the screen, my voice filling the room. My mother's smile faltered, her eyes darting nervously to the relatives seated around them. Daniel sat in silence, his jaw tight. "She's making a fool of herself," my father growled. "This is a circus." But even as he spat the words, the truth spread beyond his control. That night, headlines appeared online. From betrayal at Christmas to Miami stage, Olivia Hayes redefines design. A financial journal compared my rise to the decline of Hayes Realty. While Hayes Realty clings to outdated methods, their daughter leads innovation on a global stage. The words seared into their reputation like fire through paper. In my hotel room, I read the articles with trembling hands. Each line was surreal. My name praised my work, celebrated my story, reframed as triumph instead of humiliation. I closed the laptop and stared at my reflection in the dark window. For the first time, I felt taller than the shame they had draped over me. That evening, Ethan called. His voice carried both pride and warning. "You were incredible, Olivia. But listen, your family's company is losing contracts fast. They're blaming you for the press. Your name is everywhere, and it's forcing people to look at them differently." I leaned against the balcony, railing the Miami night, wrapping warm around me. The ocean roared below, steady, unrelenting. My heart pounded as Ethan's words sank in. They blamed me, but not because I had failed. Because I was succeeding. I thought of my father, so certain that erasing me would secure the Hayes legacy. Now the world was watching his disgrace through the very name he had tried to bury. The irony was sharp, almost cruel. I closed my eyes, letting the sea wind whip through my hair, and whispered to myself, "This is my payback." The phone buzzed again after I hung up with Ethan. This time it was a message from an unknown number. I opened it cautiously. It was Daniel. "We need to talk. Things are worse than you think." I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. They had wished me gone, wished me never born. But now the company they guarded like a fortress was cracking, and my name, the name they tried to erase, was the only one echoing loud enough to be heard. The boardroom of Hayes Realty felt more like a courtroom that January morning. Frost clung to the windows of the Nashville headquarters, but inside the tension was suffocating. My father sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, his silver hair slicked back, his posture stiff with authority. My mother sat beside him, pearls at her throat, hands folded neatly in her lap. Daniel leaned against his chair, trying to project calm, though the lines around his eyes betrayed sleepless nights. Across the table, directors shuffled papers, their voices sharp and clipped. 3 contracts canceled in the last 8 weeks, one man said, stabbing his finger against a printout. That's millions in projected revenue gone. A younger woman on the board, miss, Carter added bluntly. And it's not just the money. The press has destroyed our image. Clients don't want to be associated with a company perceived as outdated and hostile. We're toxic right now. Gregory slammed his palm on the table, the sound reverberating through the room. We've survived 4 decades without gimmicks. Hayes Realty doesn't need rebranding. We build structures. Solid, reliable. That's what people respect. The directors exchanged uneasy glances. No one dared challenge him outright, at least not yet. But Miss Carter pressed on, her voice unwavering. Respect isn't enough anymore. This isn't the 90s. You can't lean on reputation when clients are demanding vision. They're comparing us to competitors who innovate. And the press. She paused, deliberately, eyes cutting toward Gregory. The press keeps pointing to Olivia Hayes. The room went still. My father's jaw clenched. Don't say her name in this boardroom, he barked. But the name had already been spoken, and the silence that followed was heavier than any denial. Another director cleared his throat. They're praising her design work at the Miami conference. They're calling her the future of the industry. And meanwhile, we look like relics. My mother's lips thinned. She leaned toward my father, whispering urgently, Gregory, people are talking. That video from Christmas is everywhere. They're asking questions. Enough, he snapped, his voice rising. She wished herself out of this family. She is nothing to us. But the directors shifted in their chairs, their expressions, saying what they didn't dare voice. Maybe she wasn't nothing anymore. Daniel's voice cut through the tension, calm but steady. We have to face reality. Hayes Realty is struggling. We've lost contracts, we're bleeding credibility, and investors are growing restless. If we don't act now, we could collapse. Gregory glared at him. So, you'd have us crawl to her? After what she's done? Daniel's gaze didn't waver. Maybe we should at least consider Olivia. The sentence dropped like a hammer. My mother gasped softly. A few directors leaned forward as though the idea had already been floating in their minds. Gregory surged to his feet, his chair screeching back across the floor, his face flushed crimson. That girl is a disgrace. She humiliated this family. She humiliated me. And you suggest we bring her into this? His hand sliced through the air, as if he could cut my name from existence again. But the outburst only deepened the silence. For the first time, some of the board avoided looking at him altogether, their eyes shifting instead to Daniel. It was a small thing, but unmistakable. At that same moment, beyond the insulated walls of the boardroom, the outside world was watching. That morning, a national business magazine released an article titled, Hayes Realty, in Decline While Disowned Daughter Soars. The headline was accompanied by side-by-side images, my father scowling at a ribbon cutting years earlier, and me standing on stage in Miami, arms outstretched before a cheering audience. The article was merciless. It detailed the canceled contracts, the reputation collapse, and most damningly, it quoted the viral Christmas video. The line my father had spoken in front of relatives and cameras alike blazed in print. We wish you were never born. The board members had seen it, clients had seen it, investors had seen it. By the afternoon, the company's stock value had dipped further. In the quiet that followed Gregory's explosion, Daniel spoke again, softer but firm. You can't ignore her anymore. Whether you like it or not, Olivia is part of this story. The public already sees her as the answer. We need her. Gregory sank back into his chair, his breathing harsh, the fury on his face, shading into something dangerously close to fear. But his pride would not yield. Over my dead body, he hissed. The meeting ended in chaos, directors leaving with clipped words, their murmurs spilling into the hallway. The decision hadn't been made, but the seed had been planted. My father could rage all he wanted. The truth was already beyond his control. That night, Daniel called me. His voice was strained, heavier than I'd ever heard it. It's worse than you know, he admitted. Contracts are falling apart. The board is restless. He's losing grip. Olivia, they're going to have to come to you. It's only a matter of time. I stood by the window of my Chicago loft, snow swirling against the glass, the city below glowing with winter lights. My heart pounded at his words, but I let silence stretch between us. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of relief. "Olivia," he asked finally. I smiled faintly to myself, watching the snow erase the outlines of the streets. Let them crawl first. I hung up, the echo of his sigh still ringing in my ear. For the first time, I didn't feel erased. I felt inevitable. The call came on a gray Monday morning. I was bent over my drafting table in the loft, red marker in hand, when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. But something in me knew. I answered. "Olivia." The voice was clipped, formal, as if the speaker were a stranger. But I knew it instantly. "My father." I didn't reply right away. The silence stretched until he finally continued. "We need to meet." My grip on the marker tightened. "Is this about family?" "No," he said sharply. "This is business." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Business." Of course. He named a location, the law offices of Warner and Blake downtown. Neutral ground, as if our blood had been scrubbed out and all that remained was contracts. I agreed, my voice, even though inside my chest something hammered hard. When I entered the conference room later that day, the air smelled of leather and paper, heavy with old money and old grudges. The bookshelves stretched high, their spines gleaming under brass lamps. At the far end of the long glass table sat Gregory Hayes' suit-pressed tie, perfectly knotted, but his shoulders seemed smaller than I remembered. He didn't rise when I entered. He simply gestured to the chair across from him. I sat slowly, my notebook balanced on my lap. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint tick of a clock on the wall. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Hayes Realty is fine. We're managing. The press exaggerates." I said nothing, just watched. He shifted in his chair, eyes flicking toward the folder in front of him. "Some contracts have been lost, yes, but it's temporary." His voice cracked almost imperceptibly. "Clients will return once they remember who we are." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "That's the problem, isn't it? They do remember. They remember exactly what you are. Outdated, stubborn, blind." His jaw tightened. For a heartbeat, I thought he might walk out. But then he spoke again, lower now. "2 more clients pulled out last week. One told me directly we look like a relic of the past. Investors are circling like vultures." The admission sat heavy between us. The man who had spent my entire life declaring himself invincible was cracking. And then he said the words I never imagined I'd hear. "We need help." I let the silence expand, savoring it. He couldn't look at me when he said it. His eyes darted to the glass table, to the window, anywhere but my face. "If you want Horizon Studio," I said finally, my voice steady, "it will be as a client. Not as family, not as some favor wrapped in apology. Full rate, full control." His head snapped up, anger flashing. "You think you can dictate terms to me?" I met his gaze unblinking. "You dictated my life for 30 years. This time I hold the pen." The door opened, breaking the tension. A senior attorney stepped inside with a folder of documents, his eyes darting between us nervously. He laid the contract on the table, sliding it toward my father. The numbers were printed clearly, the scope of work outlined. The terms uncompromising. Gregory stared at it, his knuckles white against the armrests. "This is robbery," he muttered. "This is business," I corrected. He picked up the pen, held it poised above the paper, then slammed it down again. "You want me to sign away the company to you, to let you play savior while the world laughs." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "You don't have a choice. The world is already laughing. I'm your only chance to turn the tables." His face flushed crimson. For a moment I thought he might rip the contract in half. But the weight of the silence, the pressure of the board, the looming collapse, all of it pressed on him until finally his hand moved. Slowly, stiffly, he signed his name. Each stroke of the pen seemed to cost him something. When he finished, he shoved the folder across the table. "Fine. But this is business, nothing more. I gathered the folder, calmly sliding it into my bag. That's all it ever should have been. When I stood to leave, I caught his reflection in the glass wall of the conference room. He looked older, smaller, like a man cornered by the very empire he had built. As I stepped into the hallway, my phone buzzed. A news alert flashed across the screen. Hayes Realty hires disowned daughter's studio for emergency rebrand. Beneath it, a photo of me at the Miami conference, hands lifted, mid-speech, confidence radiating. I couldn't help the faint smile that tugged at my lips. The humiliation of Christmas had turned into leverage. The tables had turned, and this time I wasn't the one erased. I slipped my phone back into my coat pocket and walked out into the gray afternoon, the city's cold air bracing and alive around me. For the first time, the weight of my father's words, "We wish you were never born," felt less like a curse and more like the beginning of my story. The first week after the contract was signed, Horizon Studio turned into a war room. My loft, once quiet and bare, now pulsed with energy. Sketches littered the walls, sticky notes covered whiteboards, and rolls of blueprint paper unfurled across the floor like rivers. Maya sat cross-legged with her laptop balanced on her knees, while two new freelancers I'd pulled in worked at mismatched desks, their screens glowing late into the night. Pizza boxes stacked near the radiator, coffee cups lined the windowsill, and exhaustion blurred into exhilaration. We began by tearing down everything Hayes Realty had built as its public image. Their brochures looked like they had been designed in 1992, gray blocks of tech stock images of men in suits shaking hands. Their logo, a flat square with their name in lifeless serif font, screamed stagnation. Their website loaded like molasses filled with jargon no one cared about. I stood at the head of the room, marker in hand, and declared, "We're not fixing their pride. We're building something new, something they never imagined." Ethan Caldwell stopped by that week, bringing coffee for the team. He studied the boards with interest, nodding as he traced the arcs of color swatches pinned up in rows. "They need to look like they belong in the future," he said. "Right now they're fossils. And fossils don't sell buildings." His support strengthened my resolve. Of course, Gregory fought us every step. He sent scathing emails at midnight. The Hayes name stands for tradition. Don't cheapen it with gimmicks. In video calls, his voice was sharp, interrupting before I could finish a sentence. "That shade of blue is ridiculous. Our clients expect seriousness." I answered him calmly each time. "That's why you're losing them. They don't want seriousness, they want vision." Daniel often played mediator, his face tired on the other end of the camera. "Maybe we can find a balance," he suggested, but I shook my head. Balance is what got them stuck. We're not compromising with the past. One night, after 10 hours straight of debate, Maya pulled me aside. "You realize what this is, don't you? This isn't just a project. It's revenge in the form of design." She wasn't wrong. Every sketch, every line, every decision was a quiet answer to the humiliation of Christmas night. They wished me gone, erased from everything. And now they were forced to watch me paint their survival. The breakthrough came on a Thursday evening. Sophie, a junior designer I'd hired fresh out of art school, sketched something rough on a scrap of paper. It was a logo, a curved bridge, arcing upward, splitting into bright colors that fanned outward like possibility. She hesitated before showing me. "What if we stop thinking about them as a real estate company and start thinking of them as a bridge between old and new? Between structures and people?" The room went quiet. I grabbed a marker and redrew her sketch on the whiteboard, expanding the arcs, sharpening the colors. "This is it," I said. "This is Hayes reborn." From that moment, everything clicked. The new logo became a symbol of transformation. We paired it with a tagline, "Building futures, not just structures." Warm tones replaced cold grays. Photos of real families and communities filled mock-ups of brochures and billboards. The website was redesigned to flow like a story, highlighting projects not just as construction, but as legacy. When we presented the concept to the board, silence stretched across the room. For a moment, I feared it had failed. Then Miss Carter, the youngest director, leaned back with a smile. "This feels alive," she said. "It feels like who we should have been all along." Applause followed, hesitant at first, then stronger. Even Gregory, red-faced, could only grumble, "We'll see if it works." It worked. Within a month, Hayes Realty's website traffic doubled. Leads rose 35%. A major trade journal published an article titled, "From Decline to Rebirth: How Horizon Studio Revitalized Hayes Realty." The cover photo showed the new logo glowing on a downtown billboard, the arcs of color streaking across the skyline. For the first time in decades, the Hayes name was spoken with excitement instead of weariness. I held the magazine in my hands, the headline bold against my chest. For years, my father had told me art was worthless, a hobby at best. Now my art was saving his empire. But I didn't let him forget the terms. Every invoice was delivered in full, every decision cleared through Horizon Studio, not the Hayes family. When Gregory tried to interfere, I reminded him, "You signed the contract, this is business." One afternoon, he called me into his office. His desk, usually cluttered with blueprints, was almost bare, except for a single report. He tapped it once. "Profits are up. Clients are returning. Investors are calling again." I nodded. "Good. That's what you hired me for." He stared at me, his mouth tightening. "You saved this company." For a moment, the room was silent but heavy with unspoken words. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement, something I had never been given before. "This was never about saving you," I said quietly. "It was about doing the work right." His eyes flickered, the pride in them too fragile to last. But he didn't argue. I left the office with the winter sunlight spilling through the glass doors, the weight on my shoulders lighter than it had been in years. For the first time, I walked the halls of Hayes Realty, not as the forgotten daughter, but as the architect of its survival. Back at Horizon Studio, Maya poured cheap champagne into paper cups. Sophie grinned as she clinked hers against mine. "To the girl they tried to erase," she said, "and to the company that can't breathe without her." We laughed until our stomachs hurt, the sound bouncing off the brick walls of the loft. Late that night, as I stood by the window watching snow drift over the Chicago skyline, a delivery arrived. A thick envelope embossed with gold. Inside, a card with formal script: "The Hayes family invites you to Christmas dinner December 25. We hope you will come home." I stared at the words for a long time. Home? A place that had once rejected me, condemned me, laughed as they wished me never born. And now they wanted me back. I set the card on the desk next to the magazine with my face in print and whispered to myself, "This time I walk in on my own terms." Snow blanketed the Hayes estate, like a postcard that Christmas night, every branch outside strung with white lights, every window glowing golden against the winter dark. My boots crunched along the pathway, each step echoing louder in my chest than in the snow. I clutched the invitation in my coat pocket, though I no longer needed to read the words. "We hope you will come home." When I stepped through the front door, warmth and the smell of roasted turkey hit me instantly. The foyer sparkled with garlands, the grand staircase wound upward, draped in ribbons, and the familiar din of voices filled the air. Cousins and uncles turned to look. For the first time, their stares weren't mocking. They were cautious, some even nervous. My mother appeared quickly, pearls at her throat, her emerald dress shimmering under the chandelier. She reached for me, her hands trembling. "I'm glad you came," she whispered, her eyes damp. I gave her a small nod, but said nothing. Behind her, my father stood in the dining room doorway, posture rigid as ever, though his gaze didn't hold the same unshakable authority it once had. Daniel hovered beside him, his expression unreadable. At the long mahogany table plates were already full mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce, glistening in crystal bowls. The Christmas tree glittered in the corner, gifts stacked neatly beneath. I slid into my seat beside Aunt Linda, who squeezed my hand firmly, her smile carrying more pride than anyone else's in the room. Conversation stumbled at first, halting and awkward. But food was past, wine poured, laughter resurfacing in cautious spurts. Children ran near the tree, their shouts mingling with the crackle of the fire. To anyone outside, it looked like tradition restored. Yet I could feel the current beneath it, the shift that hung over every word. When the plates were cleared and dessert arrived, pumpkin and pecan pies steaming the moment I knew was coming, finally did. My father rose from his chair. The room hushed instantly. For decades, his Christmas toasts had been rehearsed symphonies of pride for Daniel, of gratitude for family, of reminders of the Hayes legacy. Tonight his glass shook slightly in his hand. He began the same way he always had, thanking everyone for being there, praising another year of family gathered under one roof. But then his voice faltered. He looked at me and the room seemed to shrink until only the two of us remained. Last year, he said slowly, I spoke words I cannot take back. Words that wounded, words that shamed. I said Olivia was our disgrace, that she was a mistake. His throat worked hard around the words. He glanced at Daniel, then back to me. Tonight I say this instead, Olivia is not a disgrace. She is the pride of this family. The silence broke with applause, hesitant at first, then stronger. Relatives clapped, some rising to their feet. My mother pressed her hand to her mouth, tears slipping down her cheeks. Daniel clapped too, though slower, his smile tight and forced. I sat still, the sound around me fading. His words echoed, but not in the way he might have imagined. They didn't heal, they didn't erase. They were simply proof of what I already knew, that acknowledgement, when it finally came, no longer defined me. I raised my glass, slightly nodding. Thank you, I said, my voice even. Then I set it down, calm and unshaken. The evening moved forward. Pie was sliced, coffee poured, cousins told stories of old holidays. Laughter returned in waves, filling the house the way it once had. Aunt Linda leaned close, whispering, I told you, this day would come. Strength doesn't go unnoticed forever. I smiled faintly, my chest lighter than it had been in years. Still deep inside, I understood something sharper. I didn't need my father's speech to stand tall. I had already built a life on my own terms, a studio that thrived, a reputation that no longer lived in anyone's shadow. His recognition was not the foundation, it was merely confirmation. Later, as the night wound down, I stood by the Christmas tree. The ornaments shimmered, the lights reflected in the glass baubles. My reflection stared back, calm, steady, no longer the forgotten daughter at the far end of the table. Behind me, voices rose with cheer, but I felt separate, whole in my own skin. They had wished I was never born, but I had proved beyond doubt that I was impossible to erase. I turned toward the door, slipping on my coat. Snowflakes drifted silently as I stepped onto the porch. I breathed deep, the cold air filling me with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Looking out at the glittering night, I whispered to myself, the circle is closed. And now, to you listening, have you ever been called a disgrace by your own family? Have you ever been excluded, diminished, made to feel like you didn't belong? Share your story in the comments. And if you believe our worth is never defined by anyone else's approval, like this video and subscribe. Together we'll keep telling stories where the tables finally turn.